Hi, everybody. Susan Storm here, and I'm very excited today to explore the world of extroverted thinking with you. If you happen to be online, please leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up, say hello. I would love to interact with you and get your questions as we discuss what extroverted thinking is and how it shows up in your unique personality type. I'm going to be joined today by Denzel Mensa, who just joined in. Hi, Denzel.
Surprise.
How are you today?
Hello. I'm doing all right about y'all.
I'm doing great. I'm very excited to talk about extroverted thinking. I feel like it's one of the easier functions to really dive into. So,
Yeah, although
being
it's
an
still
INTJ,
complex now, all of the NTJ women who used to think they were NFJ, but we won't get into all of that.
I mean, we can get into it a little bit, but because it is an interesting phenomena, I think. I think a lot of people, especially women who think, "Oh, I'm caring, I'm supportive, I must be using extroverted feeling."
Mhm.
And one thing that I always like to emphasize is that all of the types can be caring and supportive. They just show it in different ways. So a TJ type of being caring and supportive is going to look a little different than an FJ type, which obviously you, Denzel, know. But it'd be fun to explore that a little more in this conversation or maybe at another time. So yeah,
Mm.
if you're watching and you want to be have a question or a comment, please leave it in the comments on YouTube or on Facebook if you're tuning in from Facebook. We want to be able to have you be part of this. We want you to feel involved. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with Denzel and I. So yeah, I have INTJ preferences. So extrovert thinking is my auxiliary function. And Denzel, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself in case they are, new to watching the stream?
Yeah, so my name is Denzel Mensa. I'm an ENFJ 9-wing-1, social sexual. I'm a life coach, life personal development and relationship coach to be exact, and I mainly specialize in the Myers Briggs. And I just love helping people to better their relationships with themselves, with other people, and also with the divine slash the spiritual realm. So yeah, I think that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Denzel. And yeah, if you've ever wondered, I'm not sure what my type is, and you need some help and some guidance as you sort through the different personality types, Denzel is a great person to talk to, and we'll get into more of that later on at the end of the stream. But he is one of my trusted experts when it comes to typing people that I know. So, yeah, let's go ahead and dive right into extroverted thinking. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the slides for today. Always feel like kind of professorial pulling up slides, but let's see. Here we go. So, extroverted thinking. We've been going through actually all of the judging functions on our weekly streams. We've gone through introverted feeling, extroverted feeling, and introverted thinking. So, today we're on extroverted thinking. This is the last judging function we're going to explore. But if you are curious about the other ones, just look at the live streams tab on my YouTube and you'll be able to watch any of the other ones you want. So, extroverted thinking. First of all, can everyone hear me okay? Denzel, can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. It's looking a little like laggy on my computer, so I just want to make sure. Um, extroverted thinking is a judging function. Judging means that it's a decision making function. Judging functions aid in making decisions, evaluating information, prioritizing value, making should statements, and forming our view of how the world should operate. Types who value extroverted thinking are ESTJs and ENTJs. Those two types have dominant extroverted thinking. So this is the function they live and breathe without even having to try. ISTJs and INTJs have auxiliary extroverted thinking. So extroverted thinking is what supports their intuition or their sensing side. ESFPs and ENFPs have tertiary extroverted thinking, and ISFPs and INFPs have inferior extroverted thinking. So if you're watching this and you're like, "Hey, I'm not any of these types. How does extroverted thinking apply to me?" You can always ask a question about that. Or maybe you're a feeling perceiving type and you're like, "How does that show up for me as a feeling perceiver?" Feel free to ask us questions about this as we go. Um, all right. So, how does extroverted thinking help with decisions and evaluations? And I accidentally wrote introverted thinking asks, but it should say extroverted thinking asks. Extroverted thinking asks, is this logical? And how should we plan or organize this effectively? So all thinking functions are concerned with logical and what is logical and what is logically consistent. And one of the things that we'll talk about further, but a big difference between extroverted thinking and introverted thinking is extroverted thinking applies all this logic and order into the external world. Whereas for the introverted thinking types, it's more about organizing the world of the mind, the internal world. Extroverted thinking wants to evaluate, decide, and reach objectives using a system of logical binary judgments. It does not like gray areas. So, TJ types want a clear direction. They want to have a clear decision made. They do not like ambiguity. And the higher up in the stack your extroverted thinking is, the more you really like to kind of sift things down to a yes or no decision. So that's it. TJ types are often very decisive. They like quick decisions. And then if you get to INTJs and ISTJs, those are both chart the course types. They'll take a little more time, but they still like to have a very clear and focused direction. Extrovert thinking types organize their external world so that there is a logical structure and flow. And part of my slide is covered up, so I can't read part of it. But they prize discipline. They like to have a logical order and flow to their day. They like to know what's going to happen, and they usually follow a kind of routine or structure. Extroverted thinking wants a decision. This is a little repetitive because I know we already talked about that. While other judging functions have specific goals like harmony, understanding, or alignment with values, extroverted thinking ultimately wants a yes no decision or a focused direction. Oh, here's a real life example of extroverted thinking. And this is actually coming from me. So I box my responsibilities, tasks, worries, and even my relationships into time blocks so that I can give them my full attention without distraction. Once my weekly agenda is organized, I can be sure I'm not missing any important responsibilities. So one thing that TJ types do is they structure their time so that everything is getting the right amount of time that it needs. They need, in order to feel secure, in order to feel stress free, they want to have everything in their external world kind of mapped out and planned, so that they don't get to the end of the week and go, oh no, I totally forgot about this category of my life. So a lot of times if you are trying to get together with a TJ personality type, they'll be like, let's meet at this time. And sometimes that'll be like their social time. They'll have like their week mapped out into blocks. Now, this is different for every TJ, but you'll often find that they have some kind of clear schedule and order and flow to their day or their week. How extroverted thinking cares. Extroverted thinking strives for equality in dealing with all things, and it also wants to create efficiency so that people's lives are simpler. Therefore, it creates rules, standards, and procedures that are easy to follow and that treat people as fairly as possible. Extroverted thinking ultimately wants to help people achieve their objectives and goals effectively and fairly. So, a lot of the people who make up the standard operating procedures in a company and who make up laws and regulations are extroverted thinking types. They're going, how can we get the massive, like the majority of people's needs met in the most effective way? How can people achieve their work goals or their even their relationship goals? Sometimes it shows up in that way. How can they achieve it in the most direct and streamlined manner? So, and fairness and equality is also something that's really important to TJs, which is why they come up with all these rules. They don't feel like anyone should be excluded from the rules because then you might have preferential treatment. Um, and I see a question here from KSI fan. She says, have there been any videos why many ISTJs are mistaken as INTJs? I had been labeled as female INTJ for the last 2 decades, but completed the official MBTI and found out I was an ISTJ. That's a really good question. I want to answer, I think I'm going to answer that a little bit later so we can get through the basics of extroverted thinking. But ultimately, just a really quick distinction is that ISTJs are usually very grounded. They're focused on what's concrete, what's real, what's tangible. And whereas INTJs are more in the world of concepts and abstract ideas, they're thinking forward to something that hasn't quite played out yet, whereas ISTJs are more focused on present, past, and what is tried and true. Um, Denzel, I'm kind of railroading through this whole production. Do you have any
Okay,
thoughts as we're going
you're
through this?
extroverted thinking. Go ahead. You're doing it exactly how it's supposed to go.
Thank you. Well, just chime in with your thoughts as we go. Um, So here, these are some common features of extroverted thinking. Extroverted thinking adopts standards or rules to guide decisions. It is driven to structure and organize the external world. It talks out decision making to find clarity and work out their logic. One thing that a lot of this is actually something that all judging types do, is they tend to talk out their decisions. With extroverted feeling types, and Denzel, you can jump in if you want to also explain from your own perspective. I've noticed with extroverted feeling types, they're trying to work out the interpersonal relationships involved and impacts of a decision. Like, if I make this decision, how are people going to feel? What values are at stake here? What are the emotions? What are the personal implications of this decision? Whereas TJ types also care about values and personal implications, but they're first going to be talking about what makes sense, what's logical, what's going to help us achieve a specific goal fastest. These are they're going to be looking at the ultimate objectives first, and sometimes with unhealthy TJs, that can look like you people are just metrics to you. They stop being people because they're just like pawns that you're going to move in order to achieve a certain objective. But healthy TJs also take into account the fact that they are looking at goals that will ultimately serve people. Denzel, have you noticed with decision making and talking out decisions as an FJ, have you seen this difference between how FJs and TJs talk out their decisions?
I have definitely seen people talking out their decisions in general. I do see this more with TJs for some reason. But I also have seen this with FJs as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I think that that's a common. I think that is a I'm looking for a specific word. I think it's a solid pattern to go with, even though I found like some nuances with it. Like for example, I don't think that I'm someone who really kind of like talks out my decisions like that much, and I've found like other patterns, like like, well, the keyword is decisions. Whereas like for example, like there's a lot of NE users who talk out a lot of their ideas, and they have to speak in order to then connect things. But yeah, I think that you distinguishing that from like actual like just decision making, I think that's like, yeah, that's a really good distinction. So yeah, all of that to say that yes, I've noticed that pattern with judges, TJs and FJs, even if it's not like 100% across the board.
Thank you, Denzel. I appreciate that. Yeah, one thing that you'll notice with TJ types is that there's a strong need for closure. They don't like leaving things open ended. And it can be really difficult in, friendships and relationships or work, especially if you have a TJ type and maybe a perceiver, and the perceiver's like, let's wait for more information, or let's just, we've got some of it now, but let's, there's a more openness to ambiguity. There's more openness to waiting for more information. Whereas TJ types tend to, especially with ETJ types, they tend to have a strong urge to close the loop, to be like, all right, here's the direction we're going, we're moving forward, let's close this loop and let's make a decision. And the longer we wait, the more stress there tends to be for TJ types. um and I feel like with FJs there is a need for closure in like relational uh tension. Would you say that's maybe a more accurate thing? Like, they don't like to leave any relational tension just open. Like, they need to close that loop. Like, let's figure out where we stand and maybe let's solve any like drama or conflict or anything like that so that it's not hanging over us.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I feel like there's tension between me and another person, then I immediately want to like, hey, let's talk this out. Let's resolve this right now. Let's get this on the table. Anything to like address the issue at the root and then make up. So I think that's an FJ's way of like closing the loop. Whereas like, yeah, TJs, I've seen them to be more focused on projects. They're
Mhm.
focused on, tasks, pretty much getting things done. TJs, that's mainly like what it is like getting things done. And a lot of times that's actually why a lot of TJ types can confuse themselves for introverts, because they, even though they are focusing themselves, like ETJ types, I mean, confuse themselves for introverts because they're focusing on the external world, which by default makes them an extrovert. However, if people get in the way of an ETJ getting things done, then that ETJ could be like, yeah, no, I'm not really like a people person because they actually drain me. When in actuality, it's like, well, they're not necessarily like draining you, or doesn't mean that you're not necessarily an extrovert. And you might not be a people person, but you're still an extrovert because you're leading with extroverted thinking, which extroverted thinking doesn't have to do with people. It has to do more with like making progression, getting things done, like, streamlining. There's a whole bunch of like different facets for like resource management, punctuality, the organization of people, competency and like executing goals and tasks. It's able to put personal and group feelings aside to do what needs to be done. So yeah, there's just a lot of like different things. Like it focuses on achievements, talent scouting, problem solving. So all of these things might not necessarily have to do with people in general. But if people get in the way of the TJ getting that done, then that could cause problems. And likely, TJs, they're capable of doing conflict resolution. But one big difference between the TJ and the FJ is like usually, at least when I'm like profiling certain people, like I might ask them like, what's more of a nightmare for you? Like actually like handling like a few projects and trying to like close the loops on them and getting those done, or trying to manage some conflict that's going on between like your family members or your friend group. And the FJs are usually like, oh, give me the conflict, people. Like, I'll just handle the conflict. Whereas like a lot of times the TJs are like, oh man, just give me the projects. Now the FJ can still do the projects, but it'll just be like,
Mhm.
ugh, this is so boring, or like this is just a lot of thinking, this is just a lot of work. And the TJs can still also do conflict resolution, but they just want to like claw their eyes out. And so yeah, that's usually like a big difference I've seen.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with you, and I also think, like, that it's also, like, with the feeling judger types, if the project involves or is related to, people, then it is becomes more fun and more meaningful, so they can be really good at projects and productivity, but it's like it has to align with their personal values, it has to align with people, and a TJ type can be really interested in conflict resolution if it aligns with their ultimate goals, or even if it aligns with, like, an FI, because all TJ types have introverted feeling as well if it aligns with an introverted feeling value, but then it's still gonna be kinda draining. So yeah, a lot of TJ types do not, relate to extrovert, like you said, because they are so task driven. A lot of times people get in the way of efficiency, and so you can be, trying to accomplish something. And if you've got a bunch of people around trying to socialize, you're going to be like, get out of the way. We've got a job to do, unless you're in your socializing time block. And then maybe that's okay. I also want to say hello to DJ and hello to Monica from Colorado. I love Colorado. Thanks for joining us from there. And then that actually brings up a good question from Mike. He asks, is there a difference in how a TE presents between an extrovert and an introvert? How extroverted thinking shows up in extroverts or introverts? So there's two extroverted TJ types that use extroverted thinking, and there's four, and there's four introverted types who use extroverted thinking, and it kind of depends on which one you're talking about, but generally, let's focus on ETJs first. So ETJs are going to look a little bit different than ITJs because they are very quick to make decisions. Linda Behrens calls ETJs in charge types. There's a constant drive to make a decision, to get things moving, to reach the outcome as fast as possible. There's kind of a restless, hurried nature to an ETJ personality type. They are constantly measuring metrics and looking at goals and organizing resources and delegating to people. There's a more commanding presence to ETJs as well, typically. And there's a higher tolerance for managing people. I've noticed that ETJs are very good at saying, here's what we need to do. I need you to do that, you to do that, and you to do that. And they can do that very quickly. ITJs their extroverted thinking is coming behind either introverted sensing or introverted intuition. So they need more reflection time before they jump into forward movement. Um, ISTJs and INTJs are both chart the course personality types in Linda Behrens' system. And these types, they are looking for the ultimate pathway to reach an objective, but the process of refining the path and the process is more important than just moving very, very fast. Because they have extroverted thinking, they still like closure on decisions, they still like to be productive, they still like to see that progress is being made. That's very important to them. But there's not as hurried of an energy with ITJs. They need to get into their heads more. They need to conceptualize an end result. They need to map it out mentally or on paper. They take more time in the processing part of the decision and in the strategizing and creating the plan. I hope that answers your question. That's just the TJ types, the ETJs and the ITJs. If you meant specifically maybe for ENFPs or ESFPs who have tertiary extroverted thinking, or the IFPs who have inferior extroverted thinking, then let me know, because that would be a whole different ballgame with those four types. All right, so let's move to our next slide. Let me take this comment down here. So these are some quotes about extroverted thinking from some of the thought leaders in the Myers-Briggs community. So I always like to start with Isabelle Briggs-Myers because she's the mother of typology. She says much of the extroverted thinker's effectiveness stems from their willingness to issue as strict orders to themselves as to anyone else. They stake out their objectives well in advance and put a lot of systematic effort into reaching them on schedule. So TJs are very time conscious. The schedule is very important. Deadlines are very important. And what she said about the extroverted thinking type issuing strict orders to themselves as to anyone else, that comes down to the whole equality and fairness facet of extroverted thinking. A, a good extroverted thinking type is not just going to, some people have this idea that TJs just want to boss everyone around and run the world. But a good, healthy TJ type is just as concerned with self-discipline as they are with having disciplined people around them who are all working together to achieve the goal that is going to be best for people. Linda Behrens says, extroverted thinking helps us organize our environment and ideas through charts, tables, graphs, flowcharts, outlines, and so on. At its most sophisticated, this process is about organizing and monitoring people and things to work efficiently and productively. And one thing I've noticed is if you're a TJ type, you usually have either a whiteboard or an app on your phone or a piece of paper that's got some kind of flow chart or some kind of table in which you've organized some part of your life. I think I'm constantly making these little flowcharts and these little tables and these notes and these outlines about, okay, I need to get this. So here's what this, here's the steps we're gonna do to get this goal. And it's just actually a very satisfying activity for TJ types. And then Margaret and Gary Hartzler, they wrote a book called Functions of Type. They call extroverted thinking the administrator. They say the administrator in us objectively and logically analyzes every situation in terms of the resources available and the needs of the situation. Once the analysis is complete, the administrator sets measurable goals. So, one thing you'll notice about TJ types is they usually know where all their resources are. They run numbers in their heads very regularly, because they'll never know when someone might need something where they're going to have to call upon those metrics, those numbers, whether it's like a monetary number, their financial situation, or physical resources. They just keep track of those things really well. And then here's a chart differentiating extroverted thinking from introverted thinking. We showed this last week, but if you're just popping on this week, it can be helpful to differentiate the two, because I know a lot of people are not sure which type of thinking they use, or they're not sure if they are a TJ or TP. So extroverted thinking organizes the external world. Introverted thinking focuses on an organized inner world. Extroverted thinking creates systems that support people, and processes based on shared rules, standards, structures, and procedures. Introverted thinking creates mental models of criteria, categories, and logical principles. Extroverted thinking regulates, plans, and enforces. Introverted thinking names, defines, and understands. If you want to know more about introverted thinking, you should definitely watch our live presentation on that from last week because we really got into introverted thinking. But overall, the focus is more internal for introverted thinking, more on understanding the logical components of something as opposed to extroverted thinking, which is more about externally organizing and making something happen in the external world. These are some quotes from extroverted thinking types, either in history or just famous extroverted thinking types. I'm starting with Alexander Hamilton, who a lot of people type as an ENTJ. He said, "Why has government been instituted at all? Because the passions of man will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint." This is again showing the extroverted thinking types need to enforce, organize, plan, make rules, procedures. He's talking about why we have the government because people can't be trusted to do the just thing all the time. They need constraints that will keep everyone in line and everyone safe. That this speaks to the extroverted thinker's natural tendency to create laws, and structures, and rules. And then I'm not sure on Michelle Obama's type for sure. I know a lot of people type her as ESTJ. I've heard ENTJ. I've heard kind of a lot of different TJ types for her. But she said, "I never cut class. I loved getting A's. I liked being smart. I liked being on time. I thought being smart is cooler than anything in the world." And I think any type can be smart, but she mentions things like, "I never cut class. I like being on time." And if you notice, like I was reading a whole bunch of her quotes, it was clear that like hard work, discipline, time management are very important to her, as well as equality. And she seems to have a very systematic, organized approach to life. That's very common for TJ types. Stephen Hawking, many people type him as an INTJ. I have two quotes from him. He says, "Work gives you meaning and purpose, and life is empty without it." And that's something that you'll often notice with TJ types is their work is their life. Um, and or that just is what gives them a sense of meaning and joy because they're often using their extroverted thinking when they're doing their work. He also says, "I have noticed even people who claim everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it look before they cross the road." And this is just the kind of I thought it was a funny quote, but also kind of a testament to the very logical side of extroverted thinking that's like, okay, you're saying one thing, but I can clearly see in your actions that you are following another philosophy. It's easy to say everything's predestined, everything happens for a reason, but we're still going to look both ways before crossing the street. So I just thought that was kind of a funny example of the logical side of extroverted thinking. And then George Washington, many people type him as ISTJ. He says, "Discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable, procures success to the weak, and esteem to all." Again, discipline is usually hugely important to extroverted thinking types. So now I'm going to just check over to see if there's any comments we got about this. I see from Flow State, "I'm happy you're here." He says, "I think extroverted intuition is just anxiety, not a real function." And if you know him, I'm pretty sure that he's joking around. But he's I think ESTP, and he says SE is all, extroverted sensing is all. And yes, it's great to have his ESTP energy on this stream. And then DJ has a question. He says, "What is it like being a woman in Western culture with strong extroverted thinking?" Um, how would I sum that up really? That's one thing about extroverted thinking is it wants to sum things up and get to the bullet points and not waste people's time. So there's some great things about it. You can I mean, I for as an INTJ myself, I like that I kind of know innately if I have a certain goal, how to get there. The steps are not hard for me to figure out. Um, it can make relations with other women sometimes difficult because just more women use feeling preferences, at least statistically, than thinking preferences. And so there are times when you don't realize maybe you're being too direct about something, or you're not getting into maybe an extroverted feeling rapport with someone. That for me has always been a challenge, and I think it's a challenge for a lot of TJ women. Is especially ITJ women, is forming rapport with other people, because extroverted feeling, which is so good at that. I mean, Denzel Mensa has is like a superpower at creating rapport with people. It's a lot harder for TJ types. And if you're like, I have always found it like to be like rocket science to get into like a women's community. I've never had like girls' night, or anything like that, because, and I'm not sure, I always find that to be like a super complicated social avenue to get into. But there's a lot of good things too. And then Mrs. Mess says, "Did Susan just say that she was INTJ?" Thank you. Yes, I used to think I was an INFJ for a very long time. I made a video about it, but we've had a hard time uploading it. I actually recently discovered, after many, many years, that INTJ was my best fit type. And it created all kinds of commotion or drama in, in like my small type community. But yeah, INTJ is my best fit type, and I will be uploading a video about that at some point soon. All right, so I'm gonna jump over to Denzel. And I also want to say, if you're watching this and you have any more questions, please let us know. But I also want to jump over to Denzel and see, what has your experience been with extroverted thinking, maybe even in your own life as a feeling judging type, or in your relationships with thinking judging people. What are some things that stand out to you about extroverted thinking, whether it's from TJ types or from people who don't value it quite as much in their function stack?
Yeah. Let's see. So many things that could come from there. But yeah, practicing some TE here, what would be the most relevant? I think to directly answer some of your questions, um, a lot of extroverted thinking types get the rep for being rude, mean, stuff like that. When in actuality, uh, I mean, stereotypes are there for a reason. I will always say that. Stereotypes come out from patterns, but that's not always the case. It's such a two-dimensional view. I remember when I first got into type, I met a few NTJs that I was like, wow, like, I was expecting them to be like douches and all this stuff. And they were actually very kind. As a matter of fact, um, like pretty much my best friend, she's an INTJ. And she's incredibly kind. And I know, yeah, there's a few INTJs that I know that are just like extremely like kind. And then there's also some INTJs that I know that are like a little bit prickly. And so that being said, that there's just more of a spectrum for these TJs than you would like think. Like there are like the very like drill sergeant kind of like TJs, and then there are very like really calm, relaxed, and chilled TJs. I always mention my favorite show of all time. It's called Graceland. You can find it on Hulu, and the main character on the show, his name is Paul Briggs. I believe that he's an ENTJ. He's probably my favorite fictional character of all time as well. And the show has another TJ on there. He's an ISTJ that's pretty much assigned to investigate the ENTJ, and it's interesting watching their dynamic because they're both using TE, but you see how the ISTJ is like very like SI oriented, and like focused on like the rules. Like they're both secret agents, and it's like a whole bunch of like secret agents of the FBI living in the same household. And the ISTJ is like this scout who just like graduated, and he's like doing everything by the book, and then he gets like appalled by the ENTJ, who's very much not with the book. But then you see the strengths of how the ISTJ, being as detail oriented as he is, he's able to, finesse some things. Whereas like the ENTJ, you also see a lot of how he uses his NI with the TE. But at the end of the day, you'll like when you see the ENTJ guy, you'd be very surprised because like you can tell like he's an extrovert, but he's super laid back and he's not like drill sergeant like at all. And so it's one of those things where it's like you'd be very surprised with like how they really like show up and how TE can really show up in the world. there's just so much nuance to it. And so I'd really advise that, people learn more about the core, which is what we're trying to teach here. And that is that TE is very focused on progress. It's very focused on like the progress of uh, projects, closing those loops, getting things done. It, like we said, like it's kind of binary in the sense of like, does it work or does it not work? And it's focused on like what is the best and most efficient, most logical way of being able to make things happen. Sorry if you can hear the thunder in the background; it's really loud here. Uh, but yeah, that's pretty much how TJs are like, and they can also, not always, but a lot of them can be, in my opinion, as an FE Dom, very unaware of their tone. And so it's very easy to assume that a TJ is being rude to you, or is, a mean person, when in actuality they're just not as aware a lot of times of like like the lack of inflections in how they speak. And their faces can be a little bit more straight. Sometimes they're like thinking and the way they can say something can make you feel like they're trying to say like you're stupid, like when really in actuality it's like they're just always thinking like, how does something like make sense to them? And so that's not really them trying to like always condescend you. Sometimes they are, depending on the individual, but not always. It's not something that you should always assume. And these are some things I really had to like learn as I like became more familiar with TJs. Like even Susan is so insanely sweet, guys. Like you guys have no idea. However, it was unfortunate. She's probably gonna laugh at me for this, but we were both at the profiler training event back in for personality hackers profiler training event, and somebody had come up to Susan and was like, "Oh my gosh, like I read your articles and everything like that," and like they were pretty much like fangirling Susan. And because I know Susan personally, I know that this isn't what was going on in her head. I know that she was actually like, really like surprised and like happy, like wow, like because Susan genuinely like thinks like, like, oh, people won't know me, or maybe my stuff isn't as good as I think it is. And so she was genuinely surprised and grateful, but her face was pretty much communicating, why is this girl like all up on me like that? Get away from me. And and I was like wondering in that moment, like, wow, how many times does that happen with TJs where they have no idea how their tone or their facial expressions are coming off? I was with my ISTJ friend yesterday. She was in town, and it's funny because today she was at the airport, and she said that she was just moving like through the TSA, and then the person asked her a question, and then she said what, and then the person pretty much like later on said like, don't respond with what, like that's rude. And like pretty much it just became like a whole thing, and it's like, that's just kind of how she talks as a person, but like her tone is like more like flat. And so even with that, like maybe like, I don't know, for someone like me, if I said like what, it would probably come off like differently. Whereas like for her, like she's usually more like business like in how she speaks and her facial expressions. Even to the point where like when I was introducing her to some of my friends yesterday, then when she met my ENFJ friend for the first time, then the ENFJ friend was like, yeah, she seems like she has an attitude. And it's like, she's not familiar with type S. It's like, oh, she doesn't really have an attitude. She's just an ISTJ. That's how they talk. A lot of them. But yeah, all of that being said, uh TE in and of itself is a very helpful function. Like, when I literally like see
Oh, you're frozen. I don't know. Can anyone else hear Denzel? Leave a comment if you can. Maybe I'm not sure if it's just my end or if he's frozen on his end. Let me give him a minute here. And if you can hear what Denzel is saying, leave a comment. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. He said he just texted me and said that the internet shut off for a moment. So We'll he's coming right back on. Just give him a minute here to do that. That's the problem with these live streams, especially if you're in like stormy weather. Sometimes they just, your internet just goes out or your electricity goes out. So DJ says he might be stunned by my beauty. Sorry. That's probably what happened, DJ. And yeah, I guess I can speak a little bit to, again, what Denzel was saying about profiler training or being a woman who had TJ preferences is exactly what he said is correct. What Denzel said is correct. Um, a lot of times TJs aren't aware of their tone, how they're coming across, or their facial expressions. And one thing that feeling judging types are so good at is knowing like how to engage people emotionally and how to smile and use a warm tone, how to maybe pat people on the shoulder in the best way, and just how to make people feel really comfortable. And one thing that a lot of TJ women, they're like, I really care about people, I'm really supportive, I really care about getting people's needs met, and so they think maybe they're feeling judging types. And one thing that is kind of a difference is that just doesn't come as naturally. And yeah, I remember at this profiler training event, there were quite a few people there I really was excited to see. And some people I had worked with in type before. And I remember there was a woman named Carol Linden who's really amazing. She's an ENFP, works in type. And she was like, Hi, Susie. And I was like, Hey. And I went and gave her a hug. But later that day, she said to me, Oh, I thought you were really unhappy to see me because you had this really like almost like like blank or unhappy look on my face. And I had no idea. I thought, of course, she's going to know I'm happy to see her. I thought I smiled. I thought I seemed happy to see her. But this happens a lot with, it's kind of the curse of being thinking judgers. Sometimes people think that you are kind of detached and don't care about things or don't care about them, maybe, when really you do. It's just that TJs have introverted feelings. So a lot of times their feelings, their warmth, it's all under wraps. It's more on the inside than it is revealed on the outside. So yeah, a lot of times, and that can make it very difficult for TJ women because in the world of women, it's very kind of expected that you will extrovert feeling, that you will be very engaging, warm, and know how to do chit chat, girl talk. I don't know how to even describing it. I'm struggling a little bit, but there's always, for me and for many other TJ women I've known, always felt like there's sort of a barrier between myself and these groups and communities of women. I always feel like maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I don't quite know why. So it's kind of the sad story of being a TJ woman. But I think that there's plenty of TJ women who've figured it out too. And if they have, let me know your secrets. Jennifer Lundberg said, My experience has shown that in general, men seem to not appreciate the forwardness and take charge attitude of a female extroverted thinking type. Women seem to either admire it or to feel hurt by it. There are exceptions, of course. And yeah, I guess it depends. Yeah, sometimes, you know, s- culturally speaking, at least in the US, women were kind of given a sensing, feeling, judging template of like, this is how you should behave. And I know I grew up with that. I know a lot of the women I knew grew up with that. I feel like SFJ was kind of the template for the ideal woman. And sometimes when you show up as a TJ type, it's seen as maybe less uh, feminine in some ways than the SFJ types. SFJ women are likely to show up. But I mean, I'm hoping that's changing and that, there's more. I think there's more room now, I hope, for women to express themselves in different ways. And then Charisse Lewis says, I'm an ESTJ and come from a long line of ESTJs. Lists have always helped keep me on track. And that's another thing. TJ types are always going to have their lists. Always. I always have, like my big paper lists where that I'm keeping track of when I'm working, when I'm doing anything. I think my husband, who is an ESTP, laughs a lot because we'll be talking about something and I have to go get a pen and paper and make a list or an outline or a flow chart or a schedule or a plan. And that's part of extroverted thinking. It's organizing your thinking externally through talking, through diagramming, outlining, planning, scheduling. Are there any other questions that anyone here has about extroverted thinking? And Denzel's back. Yay. Denzel,
Mm. I saw
is it
that
the
coming.
storm?
Yep. As soon as I said that sorry about the thunder, I was actually gonna make a disclaimer that hopefully the power doesn't go out, but I didn't want to jinx it. Anyway.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
it happens here actually quite a bit too with the
Mm.
hurricanes and things, and yeah, so we're glad you're back. And I was just talking about the how hard it is to be a TJ female to all the viewers. But yeah, when I remember looking at you, Denzel, at profiler training when the woman was saying, "Oh, it's Susan Storm," and that's right. I had no idea that my face seemed confused or like put off in any way. What was going through my head when it happened was, "Oh, what is the right response for this? I've never encountered this before. Nobody knows who I am in everyday life. So, okay, I need to say thank you. I need to act like grateful but not proud." And like so I'm trying to come up with like the what is the proper like reaction, and probably in the process of trying to think through what is the proper reaction, I looked like totally unimpressed or something when actually I was very honored um that she appreciated what I write. It actually meant a lot to me. So now I feel like I need to find her and like apologize.
I'm sure that they understand. Thankfully, they
But
all
yeah, if you're
know type,
watching this,
so you know.
yeah, if you're watching this and you're like you've gotten offended by a TJ type before and you thought, wow, they really didn't like me. Maybe they did, and they just it's like I like to call it like resting INTJ face, or just
Yeah.
maybe just apply resting TJ face. So yeah, we don't our feelings just don't always show up on our face. And so yeah, we can get really misinterpreted for that.
Mhm,
And then I
mhm,
have a
mhm.
comment here from Jennifer. She says, "I totally get the barrier feeling with certain groups of women. It feels like I will just never be on their level, and I never seem to be able to fit in with those groups." And Jennifer, you've got total empathy from me because I have the same problem. I mean, I have a couple individual female friends and lots of female acquaintances through work and things like that. But I think it is tough being a TJ woman, because of that. Exactly what Denzel was saying, what I was saying before is I think it's kind of expected that as a woman, you're just going to be able to have this really like supportive, emotional vibe, create that with people. And it just doesn't, I do think that like our inner feelings are often not, are often misconstrued through our tone of voice or our facial expressions and things like that. Um, any other questions from anyone or any other comments about being a TJ? We could, if there aren't any, we could go into what unhealthy extroverted thinking looks like as opposed and healthy extroverted thinking, because each function has a dark side and each function has what it looks like when it's wonderful, and the two can look very different. Um Denzel, do you feel like given a few examples of healthy extroverted thinking?
Yeah, I think that healthy extroverted thinking is essentially looking for ways to create systems that will benefit everyone, including themselves, completing certain projects, and making sure that they're also considering the individual at hand. In fact, I think the most integrated TJs are the ones who are able to create the systems that allow the space for people to be themselves and to be like individualized, whereas unhealthy usually is not thinking about how other people or even their own values and their own uh morals or conscience in that way. And they're just going after whatever they need to, like by any means necessary. I think that's like very like unhealthy TJ. Like just because you can do it, does that mean that you should do it? And should you do it in that way? And are you checking in with yourself? Are you like really making sure, like, is this who I am? Is this how I want to be represented? Am I considering how everybody else is going to feel, and how I am going to be impacted with this long term? So I think that that's like when TE is like unhealthy, then I think that that's where it usually tends to like go to. It's just is just very like go getter, and it's pretty much trying to uh, it's attempting to accomplish a lot of things without checking in with itself and with how other people are probably feeling.
Thank you, Denzel. That's a really great example. Yeah, I think extroverted thinking, when it at its best, is it uses its natural talents to help people. It uses that ability to problem solve and organize in order to help people reach their goals, which is ultimately what extroverted thinking wants to do. There is a supportive side of extroverted thinking. It's, just like any function can be used for good or bad. Any function can be used to support people or to bring people down. And it just depends how you're going to use it. Unhealthy extroverted thinking can become very, one thing I mentioned earlier, and this kind of ties into what Denzel was saying also, is it can see people as pawns rather than individuals. And it's like, okay, I need to put these people here and these people there. It's kind of like playing a strategy game, but people are your pawns. And when it's not healthy, it's just, it can feel like I don't even matter to you. Like my feelings don't even matter to you. I'm just being used by you to achieve a specific objective. Then even if that objective is maybe a good one, it can really devalue the individual for the sake of the objective. And that's when extroverted thinking is unhealthy. It can drive a lot of people away through that propensity to do that. But when it's healthy, it actually is very caring about what people need. It's like, okay, maybe an ETJ is working for a nonprofit and they need to raise a certain amount of money for getting clean water in third world countries or something. And these are the people who are really going to come up with a plan, and they're going to get people on board, and they're going to be so driven by this cause that matters to them. They're going to put all of their extroverted thinking behind it to really make a huge difference in the world. And these extroverted thinking, like healthy extroverted thinking types, can actually look very caring and supportive, even if maybe their faces don't show it. um, and they can also get unhealthy extroverted thinking can become very out of touch with its own emotions and needs. We talk a lot about people pleasing with extroverted feeling types. So extroverted feeling types can kind of go overboard in taking care of other people that they lose themselves. Extroverted thinking types, they're also kind of a tribe focused type in that they can also go overboard in taking care of people or projects and then lose touch with their inner self in the process, and they can become kind of robotic workhorses at the time. And I've even seen this in myself. There have been times in my life that have been really stressful, and I actually feel myself going into robot mode. And I'm like, I am just a task robot. I will get this done. And even like in my relationships and things, it's like I want to do the right things, but I do it in a very robotic way. It's like I'm completely detached from all my wants, desires, feelings, and it's just here's what the task I have to do. I'm have the objective, I'm going for it. And it's like my emotions and feelings are completely like obliterated temporarily. It's not really a good feeling. So Lilia asks, what is the distinctive difference between perceived rudeness of extroverted thinking and introverted thinking? Um, Denzel, I mean, I have thoughts, but I'm going to jump to you because I just talked for a while. Do you have any thoughts on the how the ways that introverted thinking and extroverted thinking can seem rude?
Yeah, I think that I mean, okay, you're definitely gonna have to tweak me with this one. When I see introverted thinking types be rude, it's usually because they like we said last week for the introverted thinking live stream, which by the way, you if you're looking for those, you have to tap on the live stream tab. It's not going to be underneath videos, just so you know. But yeah, ITPs, like the story that I gave with the ISTP, who literally was like, "Yeah, I have no idea, like, what's changed about this person." And then the person said, "It's like, so you didn't notice that I lost 30 pounds?" And he's like, "No, I didn't." And then all of a sudden, she called him an asshole, and everyone was just telling him, like, "Yeah, you're just wrong." He wasn't trying to be rude. It's just like, this is literally what makes sense to me. This is just what I think. And I didn't know that it wasn't socially appropriate for me to not be honest with you and tell you that, no, I did not notice that you lost 30 pounds. And then he didn't say this outward, like he didn't say this aloud, but he told me this during the profiling session. He's like, "Yeah, if we're being honest, if somebody is 300 pounds and they lose 30 pounds, you're not gonna notice. And he's not, he's just seeing it as like a fact. Like, this is just the case. Like, I'm not trying to be rude. He didn't say it to the person, of course, but that's just how he saw it. He's like, whereas, like, if you're 180 pounds and then you lose 30 pounds, yes, I'm gonna notice that. So it's just like, okay, what makes sense to me? And I just state it. But then because I just stated, like, yeah, this is just my opinion on euthanasia, or this is just my opinion on whatever it might be, then all of a sudden, like, people are like, wow, you're just so mean, you're just so rude. And it's like, I'm literally just saying what makes sense to me. I can't help that this is what makes sense to me. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm not trying to be rude to you. But then they end up keeping it to themselves. And so they still think the same things, but they just like keep it to themselves because now they're like, I don't know when I'm gonna like step on a landmine. Whereas like for TE users, I think that they're usually more aware of of how things will land. Not as much as FE users, of course, but I think that because they're interfacing with the external world more, they know like, okay, these are like the bullet points. These, if I share this information, this information could be used against me someday. So I'm going to keep this information away because they're usually trying to protect themselves in that sense. And also they're better at also knowing like professionalism. Like a TI user, like they'll just say anything and it's like, oops, I'm sorry, I was just giving all the data. Whereas like TE, it's like it understands that data is selective. And so it's like, okay, I'll say this much and I'll say that much. And so because of that, I think they are usually more aware of how something will land. And therefore, sometimes, even though they're not aware of like their tone and how they're saying certain things, they can still say certain things like, wow, like they'll like, I've seen TE users, like, again, this isn't all of them, but I've seen TE users like be frustrated and like condescend to you, like how did you do, like, why, like, what made you think that this was a smart thing to do, or like, why would you do it in this way, or like, seriously, like, they just get frustrated because it's like in their heads it just makes so much sense to have done it in this fashion. And especially if they don't know type, then it just doesn't make sense to them that, oh, this is my superpower, whereas like other people, they don't really have this superpower, and so then they just think that other people are just literally not thinking and just choosing to be, as they would see it, as dumb, and then they might like condescend that person in that way. But aside from that, usually it's just like in their tone. But it's not like an intentional thing unless if they're actually like using the words to like bite you. Like, I think they are usually aware of how their words are being used, but not necessarily like their facial expressions and stuff. Whereas like TI users, I don't think that they're even aware of like how their words are like coming off in that way.
Oh, thank you, Denzel. Those are some amazing examples, and I absolutely agree with you on all of that. In my experience, yeah, I've noticed that introverted thingy types, um, the rudeness sometimes comes up as like very nitpicky argumentativeness. Like you're trying to get a point across, and they keep like jumping in with like technically or this or arguing with you, but they're missing. Unhealthy introverted thinking sometimes miss the point of what you're saying. You're like, I'm trying to do X. And they're like, but what about Y, B, C, or D, especially like with NTPs. But sometimes it's just like nitpicking and argumentativeness. And sometimes it's rude in the sense that it's like, okay, you're distracting from the I guess it seems rude sometimes, especially to TJ types, who's like, okay, we have something we're trying to do. Let's just focus on the task at hand. Let's not keep picking apart all these irrelevant arguments. Let's just do what we need to do. And so sometimes, like, I sometimes get comments from, I actually sent Denzel some comments this morning from some TP types, and they'll be like, I don't like the way that you clarified this. You need to add more context in this and this. And, like you're, like very insulting and condescending in its own way. And, that's something I'm like, okay, I'm going to work on that. But they could have worded it in a way that's not like so condescending. Thinking types can just be condescending sometimes. I guess everyone can be condescending in their own way, but just like Denzel was saying, what were he saying? My mind just did a little blank. Everyone, okay, everyone has like a superpower, right? So extroverted thinking, it's I know how to reach this objective and manage resources and create this the strategy or the logistics in order to get something done. And so sometimes TJ types, they think, why doesn't everyone see this? And why are these people being so dumb? They say they want this goal, but they're not doing anything smart in order to reach the goal. And so TJ types can be really like condescending and patronizing with people. That's like, why are you doing this thing? Or why did you expect a different outcome when you made these steps? But what we have to remember in the world of typology is that everyone has a superpower that they're so good at, and they probably all of us have our own ways of being like, why didn't that person see this thing? Like, I have a ENFJ sister, and sometimes it's like, how can people not read the room and see how people are feeling and how they're responding to things? And I'm sure that like I look really like stupid sometimes to feeling judger types because I'm not reading the emotions correctly, or I'm not putting on like maybe as pleasing, and I'm not creating the rapport that I need to in a situation. I think every type can sometimes look at the rest of the world and just be like, what is wrong with people? Like, why are they doing this? And so when we know type, we can be like, oh, they're not bad. They just have a different set of talents. And also, maybe I can play with some of those talents and get better at them too. Um, and TE can also look rude, and it can be very overly direct sometimes. Like TJ types, they want to be, I mean, if they're healthy, they want to be kind, they want to be decent people, they don't want to hurt people's feelings, but they can reach a point where they're like, enough is enough. Let's just say the truth. And it can be kind of almost, what's the word? Oh, like so direct, it almost seems like wanting to start a fight, like intimidating or confrontational sounding, because extroverted thinking wants clarity and it wants a decision and it wants a direction. And so if people are like waffling about something, whether it's a conflict about something or a decision, they can reach a point where they start getting angry and they just like blurt out like something really really direct that other people would think a lot more about before saying. um DJ says TE seems like a very practical function. How does it get along with introverted intuition, which is very mystical and abstract? So, um, yeah, introverted intuition is the function that is very focused on like future forecasting, spotting ripple effects, conceptualizing, thinking about metaphors and symbols. It's a very abstract function. When it's paired with extroverted thinking, it's like you will kind of get this like epiphany about like, this is the direction I need to go. And it kind of feels like it's almost out of nowhere, but the strategy is all in place at the exact moment. I mean, sometimes it just comes to you, like the vision that you want to achieve, and then the extroverted thinking strategy or plan of how you're going to achieve it. Um, I always like to reference Nikola Tesla. He's an INTJ. I mean, he said a lot about like the future is where I am. The future is where I live and where I think. And that's when you're an NTJ, you're always thinking long term, what are the ripple effects of what's happening in society today, and how can I be ahead of the game 10 years from now or something like that. There's this very long term future forecasting quality of NTJs, and there's other ways it can show up, like an interest in the existential or philosophical, um, an interest in like exploring abstract topics, but then kind of like arguing about them or debating them with people. Like for me, it can be I enjoy probably sometimes too much, like arguing about maybe religion or um that's a very like an abstract kind of topic. And like arguing about like this doesn't make sense to me, and how do you make sense of this as a person, because this seems clearly not to add up, or these kinds of like kind of taking apart abstract ideas and concepts and arguing about them or debating about them, or finding the truth in them. It's not always in a negative way. These are I'm off the top of my head, like some of the things that I see, some of the ways that I see extroverted thinking with introverted intuition. What do you think, Denzel?
Yeah, I think that everything that you said, like, it makes a lot of sense. And to me, I think that one of the biggest things too is just that uh and I it's it's not as mystical as people always make it seem like. there's there's a lot of people who are like mystical with it, but then there's also a lot of people who, kind of are just like very like practical. Like when you watch, for example, like Black Mirror, that's like very NTJ like. Like those are like that it's pretty much a show that's like, okay, this is how I think that the future of technology is going to be like. Now, sure, looking into the future can seem mystical, but really it's like, okay, I'm going to use the SE of right now to see like this is where we are now and what's the trajectory of where we are right now for the future when it comes to technology, when it comes to, advancements in this way, and then how can we create that, and then what will that do? Like, okay, if we do have this type of technology, how would it affect society in a way? How would it affect the people? And then all of a sudden you have a Black Mirror episode. And so that's not very like mystical, whereas like, there's a lot of types that's like, it's not that they're, it's not that they're dumb or anything, but like they can't really wrap their mind around like what the future what the future of technology would be, let alone how society is going to be like if we were to have that type of technology and then make a whole show out of that. And so that's a lot of like the ways that like T and I can like really like show up. Like it has a vision as well of like, okay, this is what I'm aiming for. This is what I see, and now I'm going to create all of the steps to be able to get there. This is where I'm seeing things going, and now these are ways that we can either get to that and like advance forward to that mark, or we can stop things from getting to that point. I think that once again, if you guys by any chance like check out the show Graceland that I mentioned earlier, you'll see an ENTJ at its finest. It's very like you'll see how he's using an eye to get into the people's heads, like understand like, okay, this is where things are going. Okay, if I do this, it's like chess. Chess again, you're not using mystical things. You're just pretty much being able to have the ability to predict what your opponent is going to make. It's running simulations. Okay, if I do this, and if I know the people around me, if I know this opponent, they're probably going to do this. So if they're going to do that, then I probably should do this. And then they might do that. So a lot of people can't really think like that. And so then they have to like do more tactical things. But with NI and TE, it's like, okay, based off of these simulations, this is how I'm going to move. So it's less of like this mystical kind of idea of things. Again, there's stereotypes for a reason. Yeah, NI has a mystical element to it, but it's not always as mystical as we think. And I think for that reason, a lot of ENTJs, um, we don't see them as ENTJs, for example, or even INTJs at times, because it's like, oh, where's your mysticality? And it's like, it's not how it shows up. Like, oh, sorry, I forgot my crystal ball at home. I mean, DJ, I know that you weren't probably saying it like, like to be like that far, but it's just something that, I thought that I would mention because I see a lot of that like NI being like over idealized and over hyped online. And so I was just like, since it's brought up, then yeah, I think that that's something I would address. But yeah, all of that to say that like that's usually like how TE and NI, in my opinion, like show up together. Would you agree with that, Susan?
I would agree with that. I actually think that's wonderful. And for me as an INTJ, one of the things that really gets me in flow, if I can call it that, is playing strategy tabletop board games. Like games where it's like, okay, your goal is to get the most victory points, but there's all these complicated ways that you could go about getting the victory points, and it requires a lot of strategizing. Like I could play those games like I think I told my husband the other day, I was like having a bad day, and he's like, "How can I help your day be better?" I was like, "Can we please play Sides tonight?" Which is like this tabletop strategy game I love. And I was like, if I know that game is happening, then my whole day will be a little bit better because I know at this point I will get an hour of being able to be like in flow because I'm basically strategizing this like long term for an hour, like the objective. And or in like a more real life kind of way. Like I'm constantly analyzing things like artificial intelligence, technology, climate change, you know, astronomy, like all these different things. I'm constantly like regularly taking in information and updating my trajectory of like what I want my 10-year or 30-year or 2-year plan to be for my life. So, it's I mean, I will find new things out about climate change and then where does it make sense to live in the future and what does it make sense to do career-wise in the case of artificial intelligence. Like I'm always thinking through the trajectory and I is very especially with TE is very interested in trajectories. And so it's like I am constantly updating and refining my trajectory in life based on all these patterns that I see in the present that are where they're going to go in the future. And then fixing and refining that trajectory so that I'm hopefully going to be okay in 10 or 20 years, you know. And then also thinking about how I can do that for people I care about. So yeah, I think I've noticed, and this is just my experience, I feel like I've noticed a lot more of that mystical element coming in with INFJs more than INTJs. I'm sure there are some very mystical INTJs out there who are really like have some amazing mystical sides. I mean, I think, but
Dario
I've
Nardi
noticed
is
it.
one.
Yeah,
He
I
has
could see
both the
that.
mystical side and the very scientific side. But yeah, it's definitely not every INTJ. And it's not even every INFJ, but it is more trending toward
Yeah.
INFJs and even ISFPs. Like
Oh yeah, I
ISFPs
could see
are
with
usually
ISFPs.
more mystical than INTJs are. But that's a whole different topic.
But yeah, they've got their introverted feeling and their introverted intuition in the top three slots in their function stack, and that together can look very mystical. And there's often an interest in, the abstract or the art, these kind of interesting metaphysical things. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And if anyone else has a question, we're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. But I'd love to, if you've got a question, I'd love to answer that. I see a comment from Sally. Thanks for joining with your ISTJ hubby. It's great to have you here. I'm glad you're resonating with what we're saying. And then I like Jennifer Lundberg's comment, why be an idiot when you can be smart? Yeah, and I think probably every personality type feels that way about their dominant function. It's like the introverted feeling types are like, why are you wasting all this time on plans or something when you know what would make you happy is just being more authentic or being like, I don't know, painting a picture or something. And the extroverted feeling types are like, why is everyone so out of touch with everyone else's feelings and being so emotionally unintelligent? Or, the introverted sensing types are like, why are people reinventing the wheel when we have a perfectly good system in place already? Or why are people not learning from the past? So yeah, I think everyone probably feels sometimes like the rest of the world just needs to get its act together and use their dominant function. Um, I know I have that where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, the world is so not TE anymore, and people are just stupid, and why this is like it's gonna just create all these problems." And I'm not talking about anyone here, just people out there that have no faces and names. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Denzel, do you ever have that where you're like, look at the world, you're like, "Ah, we really need more extroverted feeling here."
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all the time. I mean, that's just how I think. I'm like, if we all literally spent more time trying to like be considerate of other people and scratching each other's back, then we wouldn't have to focus so much on scratching our own back. We wouldn't have stupid things like, oh wow, the toilet paper at the Walmart or whatever is now out due to COVID because people would be considerate. Like, okay, let me take only as much as I might need because other people are also suffering from COVID. And so, therefore, this whole pandemic. And so, therefore, I should probably leave some for them. But because we, in my opinion, have lack of FE in the world a lot of times, then people are just like, oh, no, I need to take all of this for me. And it's like they forget about another person, or they are thinking of another person, but they're assuming that the other person will also just take everything for themselves. So it's like, okay, I have to get everything for myself before that person gets everything for themselves. And I just wish that we had more of a world where it's like we're all cutting our share so that everybody can get the slices that they need. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I love that. Thank you, Denzel. That's a really great example. And yeah, and also DJ did also say he got my book on INFPs. Thank you for getting my book on INFPs. I love INFPs. They're one of my very favorite personality types to interact with. And so it was a lot of fun writing that book. And also, like, yeah, if you're feeling, we haven't really talked that much about how feeling perceivers use extroverted thinking. And I know we have some feeling perceivers that we're gonna log on today. So really quickly, let's kind of talk a little bit about how TE, extrovert thinking, shows up for EFPs and IFPs. I'll give like this, it's going to be kind of quick. But I've also written an article on my website that goes into how extroverted thinking shows up for each of those types. But so for ENFPs and ESFPs, they have that they're perceivers. So for ENFPs, like I'm constantly thinking of possibilities and looking at ideas and exploring alternatives. But there's also this extroverted thinking side that can come in and make them very like directive um, and and very like moving forward momentum towards a goal. Sometimes it can show up because it's tertiary. Sometimes it can show up in kind of an immature way where maybe they're like, oh man, I'm not getting a lot done, so now I'm just gonna like put all my energy and resources into this one direction at random, and then they switch and put all their energy and resources into another direction. It seems kind of random. But when it's healthy, when extroverted thinking is healthy in EFPs, it kind of gives them a way to really move forward with their goals and not get so caught up in switching to like the next prettier, shinier idea, but really getting things done and organizing their lives more effectively to reach their objectives. And then IFPs with inferior extroverted thinking, I'm going to give that to Denzel because you're married to an IFP. We don't want to like roast Jamila or anything like that. But what are
Oh
your
yeah,
thoughts on inferior extrovert
I'll
thinking?
roast Jamila. I'll roast her. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, inferior extroverted thinking. All I'll say is don't sleep on it. Like when they are really, um, when they're really focused and they really know what they want and they finally have like enough motivation, nothing can stop them. They will pursue strongly to get to that goal that they have in mind. And so there's that, especially because it's a passion for them now. Like the passion is where the fuel comes from. So now they have all of this fuel and it's not going to go anywhere. So it's going to get them somewhere. They might take a whole bunch of like, detours as they try to find their way forward, but they're going to make it. I also see it as like, uh, I don't want to give away all of my profiling tips, but when I'm like profiling, for example, like EFPs versus IFPs, I've seen a pattern. This isn't always the case, but I'll ask, do other people usually describe like would other people see you as bossy? And then the EFPs sometimes are like, yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit. Sometimes I have to like, do whatever. Or like sometimes like, oh yeah, yeah, I can be a little bit bossy because sometimes you just have to like get things done in this way. And then with the IFPs, it's almost always like, oh no, 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 no. Like, I'm not bossy at all. And then every once in a while they might be like, okay, well, only to my grandchildren. Or like only to like my husband or like my, like stuff like that. They'll have like one person that they assert that like baby te on, like like yeah, I'm bossy, and it's almost like cute. Like for me, Jamila, my wife, she is not bossy in any way, shape, or form, but to me, she likes to flex, like telling me what to do and like being a little bit more assertive and aggressive in that way. And we both like know like when it's coming out. Like I can look at her, I'm like, okay, I see that you're getting like some sort of like high from this, I'll let you have it. Whereas like nobody else would ever like see her in that way because that's not really like how she is. And so I think that yeah, with te in the bottom, a lot of times they can have a hard time. Like it's like they know what they want, but they're like reaching for it. It's like, I just don't know how to get it. But then when they do finally like have like the resources, or if they find a TE user who's like, hey, you have the passion and I have the ability to exploit, let's work together. then then pretty much like they create, the way in which the IFP is able to get forward in that sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Denzel. I think that's absolutely true. And I've also noticed with IFPs, especially if they're stressed, they can suddenly become much more blunt and than you'd expect from like and a lot of type descriptions of IFPs are like, oh, they're like they want to paint out in the flowers and like they're really soft spoken and gentle and they can be absolutely, but sometimes when they're stressed or they're a little worn out or whatever, they can actually be like surprisingly blunt. Like I've had IFPs like make me feel like I need to like hide in a corner sometimes when they're not in a good mood, where they can be like super blunt and direct and critical sometimes if they're like in a really bad place. Um and so that's like I mean again, that's like on a really bad day. But yeah, watch out for the angry IFPs. But yeah, thank you so much everyone came today, and I think there were so many really great questions. And Denzel, thank you for being a part of this also. You always give such amazing explanations and I think make this so much easier for people to understand too. If you're watching this and you're not sure what your personality type is, or maybe you want to know more about extroverted thinking or the other cognitive functions, you can always check out my website at psychologyjunkie.com. You can also talk to Denzel. He is a type profiler and also a life coach. And he can help you clarify your personality type, or he can help you with, knowing how to use your cognitive functions to really reach the goals or the thing, live the life that you really want to live. Denzel, how can people reach you if they want to set up a session with you?
Yeah, if you go to denzelmensa.com, so that's my first and last name that you can see my name tag over there, denzelmensa.com, you'll be able to find my bookings. And also, I want to make it clear too, like if you, like, because the time, uh, sets that I have there, if they don't suit you, then those are usually the times that like I'm actually like working. But if you if you're like in a different time zone and you want like a later time or something, I just need to prepare my energy for it. So I would prefer that if there's not a time slot open that you could work with, then just email me, denzelmensa94 at gmail.com. And let me know that, oh, I'm actually in Australia, so I would actually like a session. And it's like, okay, on this day I'll know like I have to have like a 9 p.m. session or whatever, and I can mentally prepare for that. But that's why I don't like have it like for all day, or else I'm probably gonna have a lot of like 9 p.m. sessions, and you're not gonna get the best quality session from that. Anyway, so yeah, go to denzelmentor.com and you'll be able to find either a profiling session where I'll give you like a detailed interview of like what your best fit personality type is, or a coaching session on how to help you become the best version of yourself. Or even relationship coaching, like either whether it's like with your family or with coworkers, with friends, relationships, stuff like that. Like I got you.
Thank you, Denzel. And absolutely, I've recommended Denzel to so many people, and they always walk away from the session feeling like, wow, that was amazing. Like, I think a lot of people don't get the opportunity to really talk face to face with, especially post pandemic. There's a lot of people who, it's like hard to find someone who you can really have a deep conversation with. And Denzel is Denzel. Your name came out funny in my mouth that time. Denzel is a really great person to have this great conversation with, to share about your life in a way you maybe don't get to do in everyday life. And he's really good at really helping someone figure out through all the confusion how their brain works. So definitely recommend him. And if you're not sure on your type, or if you want to use it to the best of your ability, definitely check out his website at denzelmensa.com. And I've got lots more articles on extroverted thinking and all the cognitive functions and all the personality types at psychologyjunkie.com. So definitely head over there if you want to read more information on type. Thank you again to everyone who showed up today. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have an amazing week, an amazing weekend. And next week, we're going to get into the perceiving functions. So I'm not sure which perceiving function we're talking about yet next week, but stay tuned for next Thursday. We'll get into either extroverted sensing, introverted intuition, or extroverted intuition. And I'll be sending out an email about that to my email list and putting an announcement out on Twitter as well for that. So join us next week at the same time as we get into that. Thank you again, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.